Hello and welcome to another episode of New Narratives Political Agenda with me, PJ Thum. I am wearing a brown batik shirt with green and red accents and sitting at a black table with three other people, and we're in front of a big map of Southeast Asia. My pronouns are he, him. And joining us today, Shah, Taha and Saza Faradilla, who are going to talk to us about the practice of female genital cutting, especially in the Singapore context. As always, if you enjoy the work that we're doing, if you enjoy this podcast, please do support New Narrative. You can go to newnarrative.com/join to join as a member. We do very much need your support, or you can also donate at newnarrative.com/donate. And to learn more about New Narrative, please go to newnarrative.com/hello. And now, Subash.
Stay where you are. We've come way too far. Where you think that you're gonna go? This is utopia. Please stay where you are. We've come way too far.
Okay, so we're recording this on the 12th of December 2020, but this is going to be aired on the 5th of February 2021. And so tomorrow, for those of you who are listening on the day this drops, is the International Day of Zero Tolerance for Female Genital Mutilation. And so it is incredibly important that we talk about this, and it's very appropriate that we have two people here today to talk to us, especially about the practice in the Singaporean context. But first, joining me as always, my co-host, Editor-in-Chief of Wake Up Singapore, Sean Francis Han. How are you, Sean?
Hey, I'm really glad to be here. I am wearing a black graphic tee. And my pronouns are he, him. So I'm really excited again to this one because unlike many of the other interviews that we've done, this is a topic that I feel like a real outsider coming into, right? A lot of the other topics are things that, you kind of get acclimated to in activism, climate change, and trans rights and things like that. But, FGC, female genital cutting, is not something that you hear about a ton in Singapore. So I think this is going to be something that's quite interesting, quite outside of my usual sphere of comfort. And that's why I'm really glad that we have two guests here today. Those are Saza and Shah. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourselves and the work that you do?
Sure. So my name is Saza. I'm wearing a red dress and a gold necklace, and my pronouns are she and her. And we have Ansha and I, we are in the FGC working group in Singapore, and this is one of the first kind of concerted efforts to end the FGC, and we're really excited about it. We've made some headway here and there, and we really hope for this cut to end completely in Singapore.
Hi, I'm Shah. My pronouns are she and her. I'm wearing a yellow blouse. And together with Saza, we started the NFGC working group.
Mm-hmm. So, before we get into, the technical details of this, I actually just want to ask, in my research, and as per what PJ mentioned just now, a lot of human rights activists, Western human rights activists, they term it female genital mutilation rather than female genital cutting, which is the term that you use. So, why the difference here? What's the significance of this different nomenclature?
I guess female genital cutting is less value-laden as compared to mutilation. And so when we speak about it in Singapore with people in power, with people who agree with this cut, they prefer using the word cutting because then there's not so much negative value judgment.
Okay.
And we accept it because we want to move the conversation beyond semantics. We don't want to argue about the vocabulary. We want to go into, what are the actual causes of FGC in Singapore and how do we end it.
So what exactly is female genital cutting? What does it comprise of? What is the practice? Yeah.
Okay, so according to the World Health Organizations, their classification of female genital cutting / mutilation, there are 4 types. So type 1 is any cutting or removal or injury to the clitoral hood or the clitoris. Type 2 is any injury to the labia minora. And then type 3 would be infibulation, or also known as pharaonic circumcision, where most of the genitalia is cut away and then sewn together. And then closed. So there will be just like a small hole left. Type 4 is anything else that falls outside of the the type 1, 2, and 3. So like anything to do with pricking, swabbing, scraping. It also includes like the symbolic forms of cutting, which is just placing a knife there and just saying some prayers. Or there's also a practice where they place like a piece of turmeric or ginger at the genital area and they cut that instead. So there's no actual cutting being done.
Okay. So I just want to back up here a bit. Do you have an organization, a sort of front-facing organization? You know, what under what banner do you do your work?
So we don't have a formal organization yet, but we are a collective. So
Okay.
we're a group of mainly Muslim women, and we come together because we're very invested to see this cut end. Right now, we're not public facing, but we're getting there. So we're coming up with our publicity, our marketing materials, and hopefully soon, hopefully by 6 February, we'll be more public facing.
All right, nice. Yeah, I'm thinking now, sort of like, what are some of the justifications or reasons that one might give for FGC?
Okay, so we have religious reasons, cultural reasons, and medical reasons, right? Okay.
And I'm sure like these reasons differ across the world, right? In
Yeah.
my research, I've seen that, you know, it's practiced all over the world, and I'm sure for a plethora of different reasons. But what are the main ones that are given, at least in Singapore?
So in Singapore, if I can start with maybe the religious reasons, some people believe that it is part of how to say, like the hygiene, like rituals to do with hygiene in Islam. So they would cite, you know, certain scriptures or to justify that this is an Islamic practice, and if you don't cut away the clitoral hood, then it's very difficult to keep clean, and when you are not physically clean, you cannot be ritually clean, and that means everything else that you do is not valid in a religious sense.
Yeah, and I think culturally as well, this is a long-standing tradition. We're not sure exactly when it came to this area, but we know it was pre-Islamic. The cutting was already happening, and a lot of people, it runs through a matrilineal kind of lineage, and so usually the grandmother or the mother would tell the daughter to cut her daughter and the granddaughter. And so it's usually kind of pressure from the older generation which causes people to do this cut. There is not so much critical thinking about it. It's usually done with something called, so this cut is in the Muslim community can also be known as sunat perempuan, which a lot of people think is then linked to sunat lelaki, which is male circumcision. And so that's why some of the reasons for hygiene are also simply kind of replicated. Yeah.
So what's the situation like regarding FGC in Singapore? Right, I get it's kind of difficult to pinpoint a date where it reached our shores, but you know, has it? How has it evolved over the years? Yeah.
Okay, so in around probably maybe a century ago, right, it used to be done on teenagers or just before you reach adolescence. It functioned as a rite of passage into adulthood, which was the same as male circumcision. So it would there will be a lot of like celebration around it, you know, to indicate that now you're a member of the community. In our time, so we're now 20s and 30s, it's usually done when you're less than a year old, and it's also done at the doctor and not traditionally by a midwife. So when I was young and my sister was cut, so that was 35 years ago, it was a traditional midwife that came from Malaysia. So after Malay woman gave birth, there will be a woman that comes to give postpartum care. She will do like massage and prepare herbs for the mother, and she would also do the sunat for the baby. So the baby would just be like a few weeks old, and then of course she would be using, I guess, a razor blade or something, some kind of blade, a bamboo blade. But now, so I'm a parent of 2 kids, and my peers, they bring their girls who are maybe a few weeks old, a few months old, and they bring them to the doctor. So currently in Singapore, it can only be done at a few private GP clinics.
Okay.
As a historian, I'm very curious about this change from something that seems to be very public, very cultural, applied to teenagers, so coming of age, and just 100 years ago, and then today it's something very clinical, very private, and applied to babies. And I'm just wondering why, if you know why this has changed. Because it does remind me of how cultural and religious practices have changed throughout the Malay archipelago, or indeed throughout the world, where there was interactions with colonial governments and then post-colonial nation-building governments, and then the interaction with modern, I don't know modern is the right word, but Western medicine, and this desire to be accepted or fit into that context and justify in that context. So if you look at cultural practices in Eastern Indonesia and their transformation under the first Sukarno and Suharto, and the arrival of a lot of foreign medical, Western medical techniques, and the change in the sort of practices there, is this something similar? Is it because of why the big change?
Okay, so actually in my full-time job, I actually research on maternity care in Singapore and how it has changed, and also how women navigate maternity care. And in Singapore, the situation was that we used to have traditional midwives, and then it was the colonial government that did start to regulate the traditional midwives. They started a midwifery school where there would be government midwives trained in Western biomedicine, and so slowly they were phasing out the traditional midwives through a system of like certifications and exams. So slowly the traditional midwives who were also doing the sunat, the FGC, they were also phased out. And then it became like along, I guess, with modernization as well, people were more concerned about how practices could be more sterile, more hygienic. And we see the same thing happening for male circumcision as well. The trend is the same. It's done at clinics, hospitals, and done when they are younger and younger. So sometimes just a week old as well. So it actually has gone on the same trends.
Is there a reason why the age at which this happens has been going down?
Yeah, the assumption is that if the child is young enough, there's less trauma, because
won't
then
remember.
the child can't remember. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's an inherent acknowledgement that this is a very traumatic experience.
Yeah. It's like a subliminal one.
Right. But and in the past, like the trauma, like for male circumcision, what I know or read, that it's the trauma is part of the coming of age.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to embrace the pain. But it seems like that's not the case here, where the trauma is something to be avoided.
In male circumcision, the trauma is still something to be celebrated.
Yeah.
It's something to be proud of. But for female circumcision, I think with the control of female sexuality within the patriarchy, that female sexuality is just something that people want to avoid acknowledging at all. And so that's why it's become so quiet and so hidden.
Actually, we missed out just now when we were talking about the reasons like why people do it, right? So culturally, people believe that it will reduce the female libido. Like the girl will not be like a wild woman. So that's the cultural reason, but it's also mixed in with religion, because we have religious authorities also give that reasoning, although it's not found in any scripture. Yeah.
Okay. Just a curious question here, but is that accurate? Is that scientifically accurate? Does it achieve those ends?
So it's
Do any of the 4 types of FGC achieve that
No, because
outcome?
your sexual desire lies in your brain, not in your private parts.
So that's okay.
Actually,
so that's quite.
if you think about it, right? People who have had their genitals removed, whether through deliberately or through accident, they still have that is recorded, right? That they still have libido, they still have a sex drive. So it's actually the counterfactual is easily proved throughout, because it's documented.
I mean, okay, that brings me to a question about, what are the physical, emotional, and psychological effects of FGC? Because I'm imagining physically, I'm thinking probably there are a bunch, right? But then also there's the emotional and psychological trauma, as well as sort of the weight, I think, of knowing that your sexuality is everybody's business and needs to be controlled in this very, very blatant way, right? So can you share more about the physical, emotional, and psychological effects of FGC?
I can go through the physical ones. Okay, so in Singapore, we do usually type 1, which is the injury or the cutting or the removal of the clitoral hood or the clitoris itself. So physically, the harms would be scarring, the risk of forming keloid scars, which women of color are more prone to as well. So where the scar will keep growing well until you're an adult. And it is documented in the medical journal that the keloid scar can actually grow to cover the vaginal opening as well. And that, of course, that will impact your reproductive health. There's also like cysts can form, abscesses, hemorrhage, especially if you do it on a baby and you don't know the medical conditions of the baby. They can hemorrhage to death. So death also is one of the side effects.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify, in case anyone doesn't know, keloid, what is a keloid?
So keloid is scar tissue that is inflamed and it continues to grow throughout your life. And you can treat it with like injections of steroids to flatten it.
Okay. Wow.
Babies' brains at such a young age are also not developed enough to understand or to process pain in the same way that we do. So this can lead to a negative impact in cognitive brain development.
So there are also studies documented in medical journals that any kind of stress before the age of 1 or at any young age, it will create like this, stress response in the nervous system, and the body can remember that until you're an adult.
And I think one of the most kind of problematic issues with this is that we don't know. A lot of Muslim women don't know what was done. A lot of Muslim women don't know it even happened. So I was cut when I was a baby by a traditional midwife, but I only found out when I was 20 years old, accidentally. And so this has impact on my reproductive health, on my physical health, because these are things which I cannot tell the doctor. My parents don't even know what instrument was used to cut, how much was cut, and this is something that we found very, very common. So we did a pilot study recently of about 360 Muslim women, and the prevalence rate of FGC in Singapore is 75% amongst Muslim women, so it's very, very, very high. And most of the responses that we received, about 3/4, they said that they didn't know what instrument was used, they didn't know where it was cut, they didn't know what was cut. And even when they asked their parents, even when they asked their caregivers were not able to answer. And I think it's this kind of dissonance and this lack of knowledge and ignorance that really kind of makes me personally, and also a lot of Muslim women, I think, very upset about it, because if you don't know what's taken away from you, then you can't really solve this issue. It's not something that can grow back easily either.
Yeah, I'm quite surprised, because that number might well be higher than it is, since as you said, as you said, you didn't find out until you were much older, right? So that number might be well higher. And on top of that, I think it's quite interesting because I personally have only heard of FGC in the context of like documentaries or like from Western sources. I had no idea it was so prevalent here in Singapore. Like, I'm thinking about my Malay and Muslim friends, and I had no idea. But anyway, okay, this is not time for me to get shocked. Let's move on to what are the sort of interesting intersectional effects that arise from FGC in Singapore? So just now I brought up about how Western human rights activists or documentarians, they like to go around the world and then discuss FGC, and it's something that's practiced all around the world, and I'm sure that there are sort of those there are interesting interaction effects based on the country that it's practiced in, right? So I guess what I'm trying to ask here is, how does FGC in Singapore differ from FGC in other parts of the world?
So there's this really good documentary actually produced by a Singaporean named John Chua. The documentary is called Cut. What is it? Exposing FGM Worldwide. So he found over 10 years of making his documentary that FGC is actually practiced on every continent except Antarctica, and that the justifications will differ or vary based on the religious context, the social context, and also the income or resource level of the country. So in Singapore, we practice mostly type 1.
Okay.
And it's done at the doctors, and when the girl is less than 2 years old.
So a lot of people assume that then that means that, oh, it's all right because this cut is not significant, and so therefore it's not harmful. You know, when they compare it when they relatively compare it with cuts done in Africa and the Middle East, they say that it's not as bad, therefore it's not mutilation. But the problem is that we still have the same issues. We still face the issues of consent, we still face the issues of control of female sexuality and of human rights, of child rights.
And of genital autonomy.
So I had a question about the way some of this is described makes me wonder whether there's a sort of class aspect when you talk about in the past you'd have a midwife come and take care of the mother. I assume you'd have to pay the midwife, that there was a cost attached to it, and then you have a big ceremony when you are a teenager to do this, and there's a cost attached to this ceremony. And ceremonies anthropologically are often very about displaying status, about involving the community in the recognition of a certain ritual, and does that still continue today? Like, is it more likely that because you have access to healthcare, good, reliable healthcare, that you're able to do this, so you're more likely to be, in terms of class, upper class, upper middle class? I assume this is not something that insurance will pay for as part of ordinary childbirth, but feel free to correct me. I don't know.
No,
So
it's
is
not.
there a class aspect here?
I think there is, in the sense of when parents choose to bring their babies to the doctor. So I'm thinking like, okay, when I was a child, it was obviously like a sign of wealth if you could do your circumcision at the doctor. So this was also for boys and girls, and the younger you could do it as well. And today we also see, I think for boys, if you can't afford it, the circumcision, you can have it done when the boy is older, because there are free mass circumcision ceremonies which are also done by doctors. So for female circumcision or sunat, before we used to have those celebrations where it's for the whole village to know, right? Okay, this girl has done her ear piercing, her sunat, and teeth filing and everything. Right now she's part of the community. Now it becomes more of parents do it to show to their immediate family, maybe just their extended family, that I'm a good parent. I have done this for my daughter. Probably because of modernization, urbanization, we don't live with such huge communities anymore. So who you are proving it to is just a smaller group. So there's no big celebrations, except maybe in like there are some ethnic communities in Singapore, right, that have like a big celebration as well.
Yeah, there are some ethnic communities which still see this as a rite of passage, and so the doctor might do it to girls who are older, who are 7 to 9 years old, and they'll dress up very nicely in traditional clothes, and then with many more people in the family would go down with the girl.
So, I mean, we can't talk about FGC without bringing in the women's rights perspective. So I want to get your take on what are the effects of FGC on consent, on bodily autonomy, right? On, that this patriarchal control of a woman's body. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because most of the time FGC is done by the mother or it's pushed for by the mother. But of course, this is also still within the patriarchy, and it's still because the women are mostly in charge of the children and the domestic affairs. Sometimes the fathers don't even know it's happening. In terms of consent, of course, the child cannot give consent. There is no consent. And the fact that the child is not even told about this cut later on when they're older also further proves how parents do think that this cut is good for the child and would just do it without any reluctance.
So, what about sort of this idea of controlled and restricted sexuality, right? How does that sort of play out with regard to FGC?
I think when people give reasons, whether religious or cultural, that, you know, doing the cutting will help to reduce like the libido of the girl. Like, I mean, it's just a baby, but you're already thinking about when she grows up. And it's also sort of this general anxiety, like, you know, I want my child to grow up to be like a good and chaste and pious Muslim woman. So that anxiety translates into doing certain rituals which you hope or you believe will actually achieve your goal.
I think anthropologically as well, there's a community anxiety there because women are seen as the moral bearers of society. And so, you know, if there is a slight chance that this woman is unchaste or this woman is promiscuous, we must nip it at the bud. Haha, pun, not really intended. And so that's and so we need to control this woman right from birth. We need to control her body and therefore by extension control her.
I think if there's anything that is like an actual embodiment of this policing of female sexuality, it would be this.
Yeah. I'm thinking that this would be a very, very profoundly powerful form of control, because you're not just being controlled by one person here, you're being controlled by a community, an ideology, a culture with the force of history behind it. So I think there is a ton of profound power that goes into this. But, you know, I'm still kind of thinking about how you were talking about how this procedure is done largely by medical institutions or by medical professionals, right? And that makes me wonder sort of what is the institutional response to this? It seems like there has to be some kind of like tacit agreement or a kind of nonchalance in some way by the institutions, whether that be MUIS or I don't know what other medical institution would be. MOH, or Health Promotion Board or something, I don't know. So what is that basically? What is the institutional response to this? I'm sure they know about it. What is how have the institutions been responding to this issue?
Okay, so in our communications with the Ministry of Health, they frame this as a private issue that affects Muslims and that Muslim parents have chosen to practice.
Okay. Do they license these doctors who practice the cut?
Yeah, so these doctors are private GPs who run their own clinics. They're obviously regulated under Ministry of Health as a they can practice. They have a license and everything. But maybe Saza can talk more about the agreement that they have with
Okay, so so there's MUIS, which is the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore, which so in 2013, up till 2013, they had an online FAQ which said that male and female cutting are both compulsory, are both mandatory under the religion. But after 2013, this online FAQ was kind of unceremoniously taken down, and it was never replaced with any other FAQ or fatwa or any other religious proclamation by MUIS. This is very problematic because when they take it down, it suggests that they no longer agree with this ruling, right? But not replacing with something else leaves the Muslim community kind of in a bit of a disarray and leaves the Muslim community a bit confused about this cut. But MUIS has internally, they have done the research and they have agreed that this cut is no longer necessary as for females, FGC. But I think the reluctance to make it a public stance is symbolic of unprincipled leadership within the Muslim community, because then leaves the Muslim community kind of just hanging there. At the same time, we also have another actor, which is the Muslim Healthcare Professionals Association. So there's not that much information about them online, but they do work with MUIS and MOH to take care of the health of Muslims. And the Muslim doctors are all generally members or registered under MHPA. The doctors are still very much independent, and there are no checks and balances. So MHPA, MOH doesn't really check the doctors. And in my interviews with doctors, they cut different amounts, they use different instruments, they charge different amounts. And in the past, there have been doctors who cut when the girl is 7 to 9 years old, where clearly she can remember the trauma.
And with any medical procedure, there are risks, right? So we have anecdotal evidence as well of doctors that cut away too much. So instead of cutting the hood or the clitoris, they cut the labia. And of course, when you have a child who's not under any anesthetic and they struggle, mistakes can be made as well.
No anesthetic.
Yeah.
Why?
So one of the reasons is because if the baby is still small, it's very difficult to titrate the right amount of anesthetic. So usually it's not given. And also there's this prevalent belief, I don't know why, that newborns don't feel pain, which is not true.
Okay, but then for the older recipients?
We're unsure. Yeah.
Okay.
But according to our survey, those that remembered the procedure being done to them, they remember the pain. So I'm sure there was no anesthetic given either.
Not even a local, and I would assume local anesthetic would make sense, but okay.
I mean, I hope they at least use rubbing alcohol to sterilize the area or something.
Yeah, I think they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what startles me is in a country which is over-regulated, right, where everything is so tightly, closely regulated, when the government chooses not to regulate something, it actually sends a message that it doesn't know what to do, or it has too many conflicting interests, or it doesn't care. And so, before I ask my question, can I clarify? Like, for doctors training, are they taught any form of formal training? What about male circumcision? Is there formal training for male circumcision? Do you know?
I'm not sure,
Okay.
but definitely for
Female circumcision.
circumcision,
No.
it does not exist in any medical curriculum whatsoever.
So even doctors are not really trained to do this then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They learn it from more senior doctors.
Yeah,
And
from what I'm
that's why we
gathering-
have the varying types of cut, the
Yeah.
varying amounts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable when we say it like this, but it's true.
Yeah, from what I'm gathering, there are four working types, and then of course that expands out because type 4 is just miscellaneous types of cuts, right? And then, as you said, female sexuality is not something that people want to discuss. So I can't imagine that there's like a handbook as to how to do it. So I think largely it's going to be a cultural thing. It's going to be passed down from generation to generation. So I don't think there wouldn't be any sort of standard procedure SOP thing that would be carried out here. But
So that brings me back to my question: why do you think there is such an absence, this large lacune of response by a government which is famous for wanting to regulate everything, and which has taken ostensibly on paper a very pro-women's rights stance since the Women's Charter in 1960. I mean, I assume the Women's Charter didn't include anything about this.
No.
So why is there a gap in our government's response?
Actually, I think it's interesting you brought up Women's Charter because it doesn't cover Muslim women, and
Oh,
that's
right.
that's
Okay.
also I feel is like the reason why there's also no regulation on this, because it's seen as a Muslim issue, and when there are Muslim issues, it's pushed to MUIS.
Yeah. Also, so there was an Australian anthropologist who taught for a little while at NUS. He's called Gabriel Moranci, and he hypothesized about why it's so silent, why the government's response is so silent. And so, if the government were to ban this cut, they are afraid that the Muslim community would be upset.
okay.
But if the government were to allow this cut publicly to go on, the international human rights community would be upset. And so they don't want to upset both these communities.
Well, I mean, never mind about the international human rights community. I'm a Singaporean citizen and I'm upset, right? So there's actually a lot of Singaporeans, I think, if the government came out, or at least I think if they came out to support the cut, we would be upset. But is there evidence to the on the other side that if they ban the cut, because there's so many Muslim practices, religious practices, and there's so many Christian practices or just simply practices full stop, which are against human rights, which have been banned, right? And why is this not in that category, but in this vague amorphous category that somehow it's, and as you said, it's not even Muslim, predates Islam. So how does this end up in that category of being Muslim, whereas other things that have been banned are not?
I think the fear is that if the government were to ban this cut, it will go underground. And when it does, it might be worse. They might go back to traditional midwives. Parents might choose to bring their daughters to Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia to have this cut where it's more severe. So there's this very visceral fear of that happening. But I think it's I think the government's not giving enough credit to the Muslim community. I believe if MOH comes out and say that this cut is medically unnecessary, if MUIS comes out and say that this cut is religiously unnecessary, I trust that the Muslim community will stop doing this cut. Because what we found in our activism is also that when we teach people about the cut, when we teach people that it's really unnecessary on all levels, they come away, not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that there's a strong merit in that argument, in that big institutions and governments coming in and telling us what we can and cannot do is problematic in its own way. But now I'm kind of turning my critical eye towards MUIS. So why has there been such a lack of just a definitive statement, where really they should be the ones making the definitive statements about what is and isn't permitted? So why is that the case?
I think maybe, from the religious point of view, there is a diversity of opinion on this issue. So it's for them to come out and say that we take this one opinion and we say that it's forbidden, right? It's haram. I think they would be upsetting like other sectors, other parts of the Muslim population, because the Muslim community is also, it has its own diversity of opinion, diversity of schools of thought, of sects, and that it's not just on this issue but other issues as well, that failure to take a principled stand on one certain issue. I can think of polygamy, for example. We have not banned polygamy, whereas other Muslim countries have banned it. Other countries with Muslim populations. So I don't know, Saza, any ideas?
I think with a lot of institutions as well, as with a lot of institutions, they are still very much patriarchal.
Yes.
Most of the leadership is men, and so this does not even fall on that radar. It's the woman's
just
issue.
have no incentive to speak up about it. All right, that's quite unfortunate. So we were talking about how this issue is a deeply cultural, deeply personal one, and it happens all across the world, right? But I'm just wondering, are there any examples, international examples of advances that have been made, ground that has been gained regarding this issue? Yeah.
So in the Middle East, there have been some muftis or some clerics who have come out to say that this is unnecessary, this is even haram or not permitted within Islam. And so that's some ground. There are also countries who have banned this cut, and so the UK, the US, parts of Europe. But the problem with banning the cut is it doesn't mean that it then doesn't happen. It still happens, and it requires more of a community shift than it does on a policy level.
What about like a little closer to home? What about Malaysia? How has there been advancements on this issue?
So there is a local women's group called Sisters in Islam, and they organize focus group discussions with grassroots women all over Malaysia. And what they found is that when they ask the women, they explain like the harms of the cut, how it's done. So basically they try to give as much information as possible of possible harms, benefits, everything. And they found that like half of the women will say like, hold on, I didn't know all this. So can you give me more information? And then the other half says that they will actually still continue to cut no matter what any fatwa or any religious opinion that is given. They will continue to do so because this is part of their culture and part of their religion. So I think, their experience helps us learn that we have to approach it from many angles. So we need to have that community education approach where we have conversations with parents, conversations with grandparents, and educate them on what is being done, what are the harms to the child, and then we leave it as like an informed decision. So at least know what is happening, if you choose to do it.
Wait, hold on. You're saying that in a religiously and ethnically divided country, there was a public discussion of a controversial religious issue and it didn't lead to riots? I think this is going to be news to the PAP. Good golly. Everything they know is wrong. Okay, but seriously, this really shows like the importance of a good public discussion and why if you just raise awareness and educate people about an issue instead of burying it away, people can come to their own conclusions, and also that it's not something that's going to be incredibly divisive or lead to any sort of conflict, but that people can be very reasonable and and come to their own understanding.
Yeah.
Am I right to observe also that in the Malaysian context, this is a very ground up, grassroots discussion, rather than leaders of institutions, whether they are religious institutions or governmental institutions? It's not so much happening on an institutional level, but rather on a grassroots level.
Yeah, I would say institutionally the stance is pro FGC.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had like I think Wan Aziza said that this is part of Malaysian culture. FGM is part of Malaysian culture. So okay, and then you have their MOH trying to standardize and medicalize the procedure. But there are also religious figures such as the Mufti of Perlis who came out. He said on an online video, he said that he actually said it's the issue of consent. We do it to our children, but I think it should not carry on. If the girl wants to do it as an adult, then it is up to her. Okay. So sometimes I think for people that look up to religious figures, that kind of statement is very powerful. Because locally, when we don't have that principled stand, then it leaves the floor also open to different religious authorities, different like speakers, religious speakers and religious teachers to all say different things. And we know that some of them say that yes, you still have to cut your girls because it will reduce their libido, that kind of thing.
Which is why this kind of regional solidarity is very important for us, because if our leaders are unwilling to make a stance, but someone who is also in the Shafi'i school of thought, which is one of the religious jurisprudence in Islam, if they are willing to make that stance, then we can use that stance when talking to our community.
That brings up a broader point about Asian or international solidarity on the issue. What does the scene look like there?
Yeah, so I think there is starting to be great solidarity. I think there is already international solidarity, and especially in the Middle East and Africa, there are very, very strong networks to end FGC. The Asian network to end FGC just started earlier this year or late last year, and it's really good because now we are talking to our partners in different countries, activists who are still working on this issue, and we are trying to learn from them, in their context, which might have some similarities with ours, what has worked and what didn't, and we're helping them, test their apps that they started. We are on panels together. We attend a conference recently with all of us, the first ever conference for the Asian network, and it was really inspiring to hear from all these women who work on this issue, despite whatever obstacles and challenges they face in their own countries.
Now, I want to bring it back to our Singaporean context, what have activists or community members achieved or advanced, or what is the ground that's been gained locally?
So I think before our working group, there were probably, I think, only 3 women that I knew that kept talking about this at least since 2013. So kind of doing things in our own individual way, like writing articles, speaking to individuals. Because I wrote a few articles about it some time ago, I got a lot of DMs, like friends and strangers, asking for advice or asking for help about or information about the issue. And as part of the group that I started, Crit Talk, we have had workshops where we discuss this FGC as part of over the overall issue of consent and bodily autonomy. And on that small scale, we have had really good success because participants, after they come to the workshop, they say wow, I didn't know all this, I don't think I'm going to cut my children. So and then now we've started the working group, and we're planning quite a few activities leading up to February 6th.
Yeah, so I think we are doing a lot of community awareness, and so we're collaborating with local podcasts like this, and also with those which have a Muslim reach as well. We think that's particularly important because we want to reach Muslim new parents especially.
Yes.
We're coming up with an online FAQ, which debunks myths about FGC, and so 10 myths about FGC, and then we debunk each of them. And so what we hope is that this will allow people to think for themselves and to not do it. We're also working with MOH, MUIS, and MHPA to try to understand the reluctance to take a public stance against FGC, and to convince them that it's okay, that nothing bad will happen, and also just to find out what the concerns are so that we can address them. And we're doing kind of just general awareness raising. So we intend to have an Instagram page that's to collate all these resources as well, and to do a video series.
And we'll have some panels, so with parents who have chosen not to cut their children. So hopefully we can have, parents or people who are questioning it. At least that's the first step. You're just let me find out more. Hopefully we can give them more information and help them make an informed decision. We're also planning a panel with a medical professional. So we do know, we do have allies in the healthcare profession, because not all of the Muslim healthcare professionals also agree with this. There's also diversity in their, in their organization as well. And we have one more panel. What was it?
The religious leaders.
Oh yeah, we're hoping for that. If we can get some religious leaders to come and at least have a discussion with us, if we can ask them questions, or at least.
So I'm getting the sense that this is a wonderful but burgeoning and blossoming movement, right? It's been it's a recent movement. It's something that's kind of just started, and people are just coming together to speak about it. But thus far in your activism, what are some of the biggest hurdles or challenges that you faced?
I think for me it would be that people think this is not harmful. The use of minimizing language when we talk about sunat versus FGM. So these people would say yes, FGM is horrible, it's terrible, referring to type 2, type 3 infibulation. But they will say I don't believe our sunat is FGM. The minimizing language used is we say in Malay, just cut a little bit. It's just a little bit. So I guess that would be the mindset, maybe. That's really hard to push through.
It's an easy knee-jerk response that gets them to shut down arguments.
And part of it is also this defensiveness, being a minority population in Singapore, where we feel so many of our other rituals are under attack, our mosque is under attack, whatever it is, our ability to practice our religion, we cannot wear hijab at the workplace. So it all, I feel it comes together in this perfect storm of yet one more thing. That's why we feel, the movement it's really important to have the movement led by us,
yes,
who come from the community, we know what it's about, and and yet, we still think like it should not continue.
Yeah, to add on to that, I think the use of minimizing language, not only from our community members, but also from people in power, who refuse to kind of see this as a very important issue, refuse to see this as something very, very harmful and that needs to end. I think that is particularly disappointing sometimes.
Can you flesh that out a little bit? What does that sort of look like? You mentioned people in power. Who exactly are we talking about here? And what have they said that has been so, problematic?
So I did my undergraduate thesis on female genital cutting, and it was about exploring the reasons for it and providing recommendations for what can be done to end it. So I did approach several Muslim ministers with my thesis and with an invitation for a kopi chat about this. About this cut, but the response was very, very minimal. The response was either no response at all, or that we don't want to discuss this. Even when I was invited to speak about this with some Muslim ministers, the response given to me by the Muslim minister was that if we were to stop this cut, it would shut down, it would piss off a lot of the conservatives. And the analogy given was that when you close the door and after that you lock it, then you cannot open it easily. So right now we don't want to close that door. So they will still want to engage these conservatives, and they feel like if they just ended this cut, it wouldn't engage the conservatives, and the conservatives would not support them in other things. Which I think is an assumption that the community is not ready, the community is conservative, and I offered to do a survey of all Muslims in Singapore, so we can really find out, is the community ready? Because often the argument that we're given is the community is not ready. But what does ready look like? Who defines this readiness? And when will we ever be ready if we don't talk about this?
And we are part of the community, and we are ready. So are we not also part of the community, and also are we not citizens of Singapore who deserve to not have such a thing done?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm kind
And
of...
what about, there's one other member of the community we haven't talked about, our female Muslim president. Have you tried talking to her? Because she may not have legislative authority in any sense, but she has a huge amount of moral authority as president, and she can speak out and has spoken out on racial and religious issues, which is actually the chief responsibility of the president nowadays, given that so many other things, including financial issues, have been cut. So have you tried talking to her?
Maybe I haven't tried hard enough. I've just emailed. Maybe I can try through other means. I'm not sure what.
Maybe you can stand outside the istana with a smiley face. No, don't do that.
With a cut vulva. Okay.
Yikes. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm very curious about this. I'm just wondering, is this a uniquely Singaporean response here? Because I'm thinking it just sounds awfully like the way that the rest of Singapore is, that whenever change or human rights is brought up, the idea here is it'll lead to X, Y, and Z. We don't want to do this because it's going to disengage a conservative sector of society. It's never about, well, let's have that discussion though and see where it goes. Like, let's get the different voices together and see what grounds we can make. It's always about, we need to do this or don't do it, and then here are the ramifications, therefore for pragmatic reasons we don't do this, right?
Like, it's all hypothetical.
Yeah. Exactly, right? And it sounds like a bizarrely Singaporean thing to me, because I can't imagine that if you were a Muslim scholar or somebody with this kind of institutional power, that you would care all that much, because you know the philosophy, you know the ideology, you've studied this stuff, just putting your voice out there shouldn't be too much of a big issue. But it seems to be in Singapore that it is a big issue, that the pragmatics is considered before the ideology or the philosophy. So do you think it's a Singaporean phenomenon, or is this how it is across the world?
I don't know.
Yeah, I can imagine. I feel like it does happen in
other countries
as well.
Okay.
But maybe not at the same intensity, and I think it's also because of our education system, right, where critical discourse is not encouraged, and so when the government doesn't allow it, then people are not willing to, on their own, perhaps, create this critical discourse, or where creating this critical discourse is very difficult to engage other people about it. So.
But the good side of that, though, is that because, we are all raised and socialized to be so obedient to authority that if you did have a strong opinion from top down, it might actually just stop a lot of people from doing it. You had your religious leader, you had your MOH, and you had some kind of ban, and then it's like, all right, well, let's not do it.
There's just something very odd to me about a religious leader or somebody in that position of power deferring to the community is not ready, because these are supposed to be sort of larger issues that do not that aren't concerned with pragmatism, right? These are religious, it's supposed to be timeless and eternal and universal, but somehow deferring to a conservative sector of the community seems a bit odd.
I gave you the example of polygamy. It's only practiced by like 0.1% of men, Muslim men in Singapore, but they will not ban it. Because of this 0.1%, and the reason is the community is not ready. So we've heard this reason many times before.
And the issue of marital rape as well, right? In that the government often says the community is not ready for marital rape to be repealed, and it took 20 years for the penal code. So this is an argument that is often used, and it's an argument that I think government hides behind because it's not easy to prove or disprove.
That makes a ton of sense. Well,
I think also, Singapore is a bit unique. I mean, I've talked a bit about these institutional factors in my work and other podcasts, but it's rare to find around the world a country which is both wealthy and authoritarian and extremely small, which then enables the government to get a lot of things done very easily, but also that because of the tiny size means that it can crowd out everything else. It can use its overwhelming presence in the economy, in politics, in social, civic, cultural spaces to assert its dominance. Right? In most comparable societies, you'd have so much diversity just because either the government isn't big enough to do these things or wealthy enough to throw its weight around, or the sheer size of the country enables more space. And if you look at comparable societies, definitely there's way more diversity in terms of opinion, in terms of space for people to organize, and Singapore is just kind of unique in that way, where we're both our tiny size and geographic location, is a huge strength and imposes limitations on us.
I think that said, though, for me personally, I would not want a kind of heavy-handed institutional response to this. I don't actually want the government to ban this cut or to criminalize it. For me, this is not representative of the working group, but I don't think we should use the criminal justice system or the penal system, because I think those are inherently problematic, and especially for a minority practice, I don't think we need further regulation. Instead, I think what we need is simply leadership.
I tend to agree, because I think community engagement, that awareness raising and information and education actually is quite effective. It's just how do you scale it up, because we don't want to reach everyone.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We have a government also which loves to ban things or regulate things or pass laws which gives it massive amounts of arbitrary power, right? For example, POFMA, but it doesn't actually change the underlying circumstances, because people aren't then educated or become more literate about the issues at hand and have no opportunity to evolve both individually and as a society. We've banned spitting, or we've banned not flushing public toilets, or we've banned all sorts of crazy things which we think will lead to an end to bad behavior. But bad behavior continues, because you also need to educate people about your roles and responsibilities as citizens, about human rights, about your place in society, your responsibilities to your fellow man, and advance us collectively as culturally as a civilization, right? Banning stuff is just, you know, an act of violence, you know, in the political sense, and it doesn't change mindsets. And so I think you're taking the harder but long-term, more long-lasting route of trying to change people's minds and making something so abhorrent that people don't practice it, rather than simply banning it.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've kind of nicely walked into our standard last question, which is, what is your theory of change, you know, which we asked to all of our guests. But I think the question is especially interesting this time here, because we're looking at an issue that is so complex and multifaceted that it becomes difficult to articulate what this change should look like. On one hand, you know, we know that it's going to be an act of violence if the big health authorities come in and make a ban, or if the government comes in and bans it. But simultaneously, could it also be problematic if, let's say, the religious authorities come in and say, nope, this is bad, no more? You know, does that create a culture in which the community is just always taking a directive from those on top? What do you all think about that? And if that's the case, then what do you think change should look like, or could look like, in Singapore?
I think it needs to be a mixture of everything, because we do have, I think, some section of the community that does look to the religious leadership. That's why we have people calling into the office of the Mufti asking, is it okay to sunat my daughter? They are asking because they are also looking for that answer, and based on the answer, then they will act. And then, you know, on the other hand, you still have people, if you ban everything and they're still gonna do it, they're gonna seek out somebody to do it. But then I believe, like, if you educate, if you treat like the parents with respect and educate them and give them information in a non-judgmental way, and just, look, I just want to give you information and you can ask me questions, and I also want to understand where you're coming from, why do you do it? From my experience, that works quite well.
There is one debate that we face within the working group, and that is to medicalize or not. So right now it's already medicalized, right? But if we medicalize it further, if we make it even safer, then this cut might not end. It will just continue in this medicalized, safer format. So should we push for it to end completely, or should we push for further medicalization? Because pushing for it to end completely might take a longer time, and in that process, more baby girls will be hurt. But medicalization would mean that maybe baby girls will be hurt less, but in the long term, all baby girls might be hurt.
So maybe you can elaborate more about the medicalization, like what does that entail?
Yeah, sure. So we thought of a few, we brainstormed a few steps that can be taken. We've done MOH's job for them. So one thing that we thought of, and this was Shah's experience, is the tongue-tied surgery. And so,
my children were born with a tongue tie. That means like the frenulum in the between the gum and the lip is very tight. So it affects breastfeeding. So because I had the experience where it has to be very tight. And there's also 4 types. Type 1 to 4. So basically the baby is not able to make a suction and drink at the breast. So when you cut that cartilage, that skin, that very tight skin off, then it frees, it gives more movement to the lip. So when my daughter was born like 2.5 years ago, we tried breastfeeding. It was really painful. It couldn't work. So I thought, okay, I'm going to cut it before I suffer for another 10 weeks. So we went to the doctor, and what they do is, as with any medical procedure, you will first have a consultation where they assess the child and look, and then if it's determined to be something that's needed, then you come back, you make an appointment for the actual surgery. So we suggested, MOH could maybe institute this kind of like 2-step process as they do for every medical procedure. You cannot just come in and like, I want to do this, right? You still have, you must have a consultation. So if let's say we had that first consultation for the cutting, and then they could assess, does the baby have a clotting disorder? Is there any risk, like she could hemorrhage or bleed or whatever it is? I mean, we're only talking about like the physical aspects, right? Because obviously you still have the psychological harm to it. But at least you have like, all right, and then if the doctor could give information, this is how I'm going to do it or whatever, and then give the parents some time to think about it and come back another day. Maybe we could have some harm reduction as the short-term goal, with the long-term goal as well being like, we want it to stop completely.
Yeah, see, because even for abortion, there's a 48-hour waiting period as well. There's the counselling, then there's the waiting period. And so we think this is something that can be easily instituted by MOH. We are willing to also help produce a brochure or pamphlet that we can pass to the parents so that they can read it on their own and can figure out and think independently whether this is necessary. We are also very happy to help MUIS craft a statement if they so wish, to come out with an FAQ, another FAQ, or just a public statement about this cut. And we can do the same with MOH. So we are open, and we think it is effective to work with certain government stakeholders for this cut, because they will have a wider reach than we ever could.
And what about the rest of us? So, as we've had a whole succession activists in here, and I always feel like as a straight male Chinese, I ostensibly have very little stake in a lot of the issues that are brought up, but I want to be an ally and I want to help. So as someone who's not Muslim and not part of your religious or ethnic or linguistic community, what can I do to assist without being accused of either causing trouble for religious fault lines and all that nonsense, or getting in trouble? I mean, of course, me personally, I'm in plenty of trouble, but like if someone else was listening who was not part of your community, what could they do to assist in ways that would be racially and religiously and culturally appropriate and sensitive?
Yeah, I think you can focus on the medical harms, the issue of consent and sexuality, because those are timeless and those are things that span all cultures. A very tangible call to action could be to write in to the Ministry of Health and also say that you recognize and acknowledge this cut, and it's happening in Singapore, and you find it very problematic for a cosmopolitan global modern city to be harming baby girls. I think this show of solidarity and allyship will be quite important, so that the government cannot dismiss this as a minority Muslim issue and like drugs and diabetes, right? But to see it as a Singaporean issue and a Singapore harm.
And I think if you have like friends or family, whoever, who want more information, because right now there isn't anything like published, I guess, and something available online that they can read, you can direct them to us. We can provide more information to them as well.
Yeah, I think this is really important. It's the point I wanted to make earlier, actually, which I didn't, is that how a society treats the most vulnerable among us is really indicative of the health, of the quality of our society. So I think we all have a stake in this. So even though someone like myself might ostensibly not have any sort of stake in it, I think it really is important that we all speak up on issues like this. And is there anyone more vulnerable than the little baby girl? These are and how we're treating them really says a lot about us as people, as human beings, as society. So I want to emphasize to anyone listening, I think this is really important, and we all have a stake in trying to change and hopefully end this practice.
I just want to ask one final question here, which is, this has been an absolutely enlightening discussion. We've been talking about it, from this sociological, anthropological lens, speaking about it almost as if we're in the third person. But I want to ask each of you personally, right? How do you personally relate to your activism? How do you personally see yourselves as agents of change?
Well, I think I try my best to embody what it is I'm advocating for. So I didn't cut my children. I have a boy and a girl, both are not cut. I talked to them about it, actually. My older one, he's 6, and he's been listening about me talk about this all the time, right? He's in on my meetings, he's like watching the videos, and I explained to him that people do this to their children because they believe it will make them good, right? And his answer to me was actually like, but God doesn't care, right, that you cut your penis or not, right? So I was like, yes, thank you. But because for us, it's something that's completely volunteer driven, but I feel, passionate is such a cliche word, but that's seeing my children. I do want to have a world for them where they grow up healthy and safe, and they can also make the world better for us.
I think my stake in this topic is very personal because I felt very, very violated when I found out that I was cut. Ever since then, my anger has waned a bit, but I think it has translated into action. And so I think I do not want other baby girls to kind of go through the same thing. And yeah, since this issue is very personal, and also I feel like I have the privilege, I have the vernacular, the educational, linguistic privilege to talk about this and to maybe talk in a way that stakeholders that we are talking to will listen to a bit more because of elitism. So I feel I do have a responsibility to also then continue talking about this and continue advocating for it until it ends.
I think like what you said, being able to give sort of that broader perspectives, it's very helpful because we have, when we do see, in the media, someone talking about this issue, but they talk it from they speak from their personal experience, right? But because this is something which is not linked to, for example, like a rite of passage, there's nothing to link it to. It's just like, I went through it and I felt like this. And then people feel alone because they don't know. They don't know that actually there are other people going through it, or that there's a whole movement going on, not just in Singapore but regionally or globally. So that I hope this podcast helps.
Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Saza. I've learned so much, and I feel like I've really had my eyes open to something which I knew very, very little about. And I think for this, it's such a clear issue. It's unlike, say, climate change, where it's so massive that you're intimidated by the sheer size of it. This is very clearly defined. And I think that everyone out there, I hope all our listeners and people watching on the video will be inspired to take action, and even if it's just expressing opposition to this and expressing a clear opinion to policymakers, stakeholders, and to the rest of your community about this. So thank you for joining us today and sharing this, sharing all this. And of course, thanks as always to Sean. Great questions as always, my co-host. Thanks for coming on, and thank you, our listener, for joining us. And do join us again next time on Political Agenda. And as always, if you like what you've heard, if you want to support our work, please do go to newnarrative.com/join or donate at newnarrative.com/donate. So thank you very much, and see you next time.
Stay where you are. We've come way too far. Where you think that you're gonna go? This is utopia.